It was starting to get late. It seemed like I had been talking to Fort for quite a while now. He was openly flirting with me and didn't seem ashamed of it at all. It was both a little disconcerting and flattering at the same time. "I think I should go and find Sarah. She's probably looking for me now," I said as I realized I had totally ditched my friend just to talk to this guy. It felt a bit like I was doing something wrong. In fact, I didn't understand why I had followed him up here in the first place. Sure, his company was nice, but it didn't feel right. Everyone knew going up here usually meant something along the lines of sex. That was probably why he checked all those rooms so carefully, making sure I couldn't see. The bed we were sitting on seemed 10 times smaller than before, and I hurriedly scrambled to my feet. Yeah, I think I ought to go find her. Already? Just when things are getting interesting, Fort said with another devious smile. He grabbed hold of my hand and pulled me back down with him. I was a lot closer to him now than before, and suddenly I realized that I could smell alcohol on him. Fort? I really should go. Sarah is looking for me. I hoped that was true, and that at any minute now, she'd burst through the door to get me away from there. The boy had lost all his charm from before. It really seemed as if he transformed from easygoing and relaxed to angry. A strange snarl passed his lips, and then suddenly he was on top of me, pushing me down roughly with his body weight and his hands. His lips attached themselves to mine forcefully, and I tried desperately to push him away. Moving my head sideways helped a little. His lips were on my cheek now. It didn't stop him from trailing kissed over the exposed skin all the way to my ear, where he bit down on my earlobe. "Let go. Stop it," I yelled, but my hands were trapped uselessly underneath his heavy chest. He was forcing my legs apart with his knees. Somehow my black dress had already ridden up to expose my panties and part of my stomach. Why was he so bloody heavy? Why couldn't I fight him? I had never felt so helpless and so defenseless, and above all so stupid, in my entire life. One hand had roughly taken hold of my breast, and he was squeezing hard enough that I moaned in pain. "Please, stop it," I whimpered as desperate tears started forcing their way out from beneath my lashes. "I know you want me, baby. You like this, don't you?" "What?" Fort was saying. "You!" "No, I don't." "Let go of me, you asshole." I screamed as I hit him as hard as I could with my free hand on his head and neck and shoulder, anywhere I could reach him. He grunted in pain when my fist struck his eye, and then raised himself so he could get a better grip on both my hands. It meant my left leg suddenly had more space to move, and I prayed, "Please let this work. Please." Drawing back my leg, I brought up my knee as hard as I could, rejoicing when Fort screamed out in pain. He doubled over, grabbing for his crotch, moaning and cursing my name, but I was already pulling down my dress and running out the door. I hoped he couldn't walk for days. I was still crying as I dashed down the stairs, straight through the living with its crowded mass of people. Then finally I was out the door and pounding down the street as fast as I could. I never, ever wanted to go back there, and I certainly never wanted to see that Fort ever again. I'd only gone as far as a few streets when I stumbled and twisted my ankle, all due to those stupid heels. I didn't bother getting up, but just brought my knees to my chest, hugging them tightly as I cried. How could I have been so stupid? I walked right into that. What was wrong with me? Shivering, I clutched my arms more tightly around my body. I could still feel his hands on me, his lips, feel him touching me. Oh God, he'd just gone and stolen my first kiss. I had let some idiot steal my very first kiss. The thought made me cry even harder. Stupid, 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 stupid. This was all my own fault. Shh. It's not your fault. Never your fault. You're safe now. It's okay. I promise. You're safe. I'll protect you. Always. Nobody is going to harm you, a soothing voice with a British accent whispered into my ear. I would recognize that voice out of a million, and I didn't push him away when he wrapped strong, warm arms around me. Easily, he lifted me off the ground, pressing my face into the crook of his neck tightly. Tears were still pouring from my eyes, soaking his shirt, but he didn't let go when I tried pushing away. He was still whispering an endless stream of soothing words, all delivered in that enchanting accent. I had the feeling of motion, but with my face pressed against his neck, I couldn't see anything. Was he taking me somewhere? Focusing on that stream of words for a moment, I realized he was telling me he was taking me home. It was interspersed between all the, "You're safe, I'll protect yous." Warmth hit my body, and I heard a door close. Then I was shifted in his arms as he sat down, holding me in his lap. Only then did he let go enough so that I could pull my face away from the crook of his neck. I almost didn't. It felt nice to hide there. "Bob?" Go check on Sarah, I didn't have time for that, Alexander said out loud suddenly. The loud noise made me flinch, and it resulted into him spewing another stream of calming comments. He was stroking my back now, tracing patterns again. My body was still in a panic state, shivering, my fists clutching tightly onto his shirt, my heart beating rapidly in my throat, tears pouring down my cheeks. I tried to focus on his embrace and his calming voice, but it was hard. The memories of what had just happened kept resurfacing. On top of that, my mind kept blaming myself for being so stupid and following that boy upstairs in the first place. I should have noticed what his intentions were. My sight was blurry and I kept my eyes downcast. I was too afraid to see the accusation in Alexander's eyes. He must think I was stupid too, especially because Sarah had made it seem like we both wanted attention. Shh, Britt, it's okay. I got you, promise, Alexander was saying when at long last I had calmed down enough to stop my sobbing. At the moment, I was still clutching his shirt tightly as I cried into it, but he could tell I'd calmed down somewhat because he'd stopped whispering and was instead just pressing me tightly to him. It felt a little as if he was afraid to let go. I had the strangest feeling that I wasn't alone in my head, my thoughts slowly filling with warmer, more pleasant things. Like the white beach I used to spend all my days in the summer at. Whatever presence filled my mind, it touched everything with gentle caresses, making me feel loved and safe above all else. Briefly, I wondered if it was my mother, but at that thought, Alexander chuckled softly. It made his chest vibrate against my cheek, and without my consent, a soft moan escaped my lips. The feeling of his chest moving so warmly against me had sent hot tingles through my body. At the sound, Alexander froze underneath me, and then I heard a groan, soft, almost muted as if he tried to keep it in. "Britt," his voice whispered silkily after a while, "will you tell me what happened?" His voice was very gentle, but it wasn't hard to hear the underlying anger, barely contained. Curled up against him, warm and feeling safe in his arms, I had almost fallen asleep, comforted by that warm caress on my mind. I stiffened, worried the anger in his voice was meant for me. "Shh, it's all right. You don't have to tell me," he said, rubbing my back soothingly. My mind suddenly felt swollen with all the warmth and love. Glove? I was sure that was it, although I had no clue if this was coming from Alexander or if I was just imagining things. It wouldn't surprise me if I was, after all that had happened tonight. "He touched me," I croaked, my voice hoarse from crying so much in such a short time. Alexander made the strangest sound I'd ever heard a human make. He growled. Like a real animal would, a predator. I shivered and couldn't stop myself from looking up at his face. He looked angry, his eyes so dark they almost appeared black. That had to be a trick of the light. It wasn't possible for eyes to have that color. But his touch was very soft when he ran his fingertips over my cheek, down to my throat. He let them rest on the pulse there. I swallowed and found myself saying, "He stole my first kiss." "My first kiss." Shivering, I added, "He stole everything." I kept saying no. I kept pushing and hitting him. Another growl erupted from Alexander's throat, loud enough to make my ears ring. Definitely not a sound a human should be able to make. It sounded like a lion roaring, yet I wasn't scared. His hand on my waist was almost bruisingly tight, but the other one ran across my shoulders and back, checking for injuries. His nostrils flared as if he was smelling something, and it wasn't something he liked. "Everything?" he forced out, his mouth barely opening, his voice distorted. The British accent was gone, replaced by something that sounded a lot more Irish instead. "Impossible! I would have smelled the—" He trailed off, looking shocked to have spoken those words out loud. "Smelled what?" He was confusing the hell out of me. "Continua gramogroi," he said when the silence stretched. I was simply staring at him. Did I imagine it, or had his eyes really turned back to a much lighter shade? The same stormy gray I'd seen that first day we met. I feel so stupid. He seemed nice and I wanted to get my mind off things. I shivered when I could only just refrain myself from saying you instead of things. It was becoming harder every minute not to pay attention to the fact that I was sitting in his lap, being held by his arms. We just talked for at least an hour. I didn't think any of it when he asked me to go somewhere quiet. I trailed off again, looking away from his face as shame colored my cheeks. I was such an idiot. Alexander was still tense, but again, I felt a caress across my mind. It told me not to doubt myself. I had been naive, not stupid. "Sarah should have warned you. She knew you'd never been to such a party before," Alexander said out loud, adding on to the caress in my head. "Sarah shouldn't have to babysit me." "We're both 18, I said defensively. I suddenly felt the urge to let him know clearly that I was an adult too. When he chuckled, his chest vibrated against me. I had to bite down hard on my tongue to keep from moaning again. Flushing with embarrassment, I had bit hard enough for the coppery taste of blood to spread through my mouth. I wanted to leave. He just jumped on me. He stole my first kiss. It was supposed to be special. Not like that. The words tumbled from my mouth to hide what I was feeling. His vile taste on my lips and his hands on my body, as I remembered, were enough to forget all about my embarrassment. Alexander ran a hand over my back, all the way up to clasp around the back of my neck. You'll receive plenty of special kisses in the future, Britt. That I promise. All my fear, disgust, self-loathing, and anger towards Fort drained away at those words. It felt as if he meant to be the one to give them to me too. His accent as he spoke still sounded more Irish than British, and briefly I wondered where he really came from. You don't get it, I exclaimed then. I'm a girl. We have all these romantic images about how that first kiss should be. I bet you don't even remember, but I will, for the rest of my life. Shocked at my own outburst, I stared at him, searching for a sign that told me I hadn't offended him. His eyes had darkened again to an almost unnatural black, but he seemed otherwise relaxed now. I realized he wasn't staring at my eyes, but at my lips. Horrified, I realized my mouth was still hanging open. Before I could close it, though, that hand on my neck pulled me towards him as he leaned in, our mouths connecting. His kiss was very soft and gentle, completely opposite to my experience with Fort. Everything seemed to be on fire, my toes curling in those damned heels. Electricity sizzling my nerves. It was the best feeling ever. It felt like coming home, like being loved, and most of all, it felt like finally being whole. When we finally pulled apart, I was panting. His breathing seemed to be all right, but his eyes were still dark, and now they were glazed over. With a gentle hand, he carefully smoothed my hair away from my face. There, now I stole your second kiss, he whispered rather huskily. Only then did it sink in that I'd been kissing my teacher, and that sitting in his lap was highly inappropriate, no matter how young and handsome he was. Kissing him had been the most amazing thing I'd ever done, and it was wrong. How could something that felt so right be wrong? Still, I scrambled to my feet and smoothed down my dress hurriedly. He followed my every move with hungry eyes. I should, shower and go to bed. My own voice sounded anything but steady. Of course, was all Alexander said as he smoothly flowed to his feet. Without another word, he took my hand and pulled me with him towards the stairs, guiding me to the bathroom upstairs. At the door to it, he left me with a few clean towels. Just as I was about to enter, so I could at long last calm my rapid beating heart, he called out, "How did you get away?" "I kicked him where the sun don't shine," I said, offering him a hesitant smile. Was he hurt that I ran away from him after his kiss? Despite the fact that I'd obviously kissed him back, the look on his face could only be described as proud, though. Was he seriously proud I kicked that guy? I undressed hurriedly and got into the shower without looking at myself in the mirror. I didn't need to see the bruises to know they were there. I turned the water to scalding hot, needing to feel it burn my skin just the slightest bit so I could erase the sensory memories of my ordeal with Fort. I stood under the hot water spray for at least an hour, but I still didn't feel like myself when I stepped onto the cold tile floor. I felt dirty even though I'd never been this clean. I felt vulnerable naked, so I quickly dried off and slipped into my PJs, loose sweats, and a too large shirt. Even dressed, I still felt vulnerable and lonely, but I didn't dare go find Alexander to keep me company. Instead, I went to the guest room Sarah had prepared for me earlier that day. The room was large and white, but the curtains were heavy. The large bed in the middle looked like a giant ice cube. I curled up in the middle of it and piled the blankets high up around me. It was cold, and I felt exhausted from all the stress. Pretty soon, I was shaking again. I felt like crying because I was still angry at myself for falling into Fort's trap so blindly. Before the tears could fall, I felt that presence in my mind again. It seemed as if I could almost hear a strange lullaby in my head, the melody soft and beautiful. The words, if there were any, were in a strange language I couldn't understand. It had that Irish sound to it, though. I fell asleep thinking of soft, drizzling rain, rugged yet beautiful green nature, and Alexander's kiss. All of it was saturated with a warm feeling of love and complete acceptance. Faintly in the background, I heard the voices of Sarah and Alexander talking. Alexander sounded very angry. The touch on my mind was suddenly gone, but I was so relaxed that I fell asleep very shortly after that. I woke up panting, as if someone had been holding me underwater while I struggled to get air into my lungs. Shaking all over, I remembered only too clearly what my nightmare had been about. Fort. Only he wasn't really Fort because somehow halfway through reliving my memory of the night, he changed into a snarling wolf, bigger and more menacing than any wolf I'd ever seen. He'd been drooling all over me as he opened his mouth with rows of gleaming white sharp teeth ready to tear my throat out. Then out of nowhere, such as only happened in dreams, Alexander had appeared flinging the wolf off me, attacking it with his bare hands. I wanted to scream and pull Alexander away from the snapping jaws, but someone was holding me back. Alexander was growling while the wolf snarled, and soon all I could see was matted brown fur. Alexander buried underneath the huge creature, blood pooling around the wrestling forms. Alexander's blood. I shook my head to dispel the dream, but fear was racing through my veins. I was both scared for Alexander's life, unreasonable as it was, and terrified of Fort for a whole new reason. I couldn't shake the thought that he really was a wolf. A wolf in sheep's clothes. The large dark room had shadows looming everywhere, and I couldn't take it anymore. I yanked the blankets that had tangled around me away and nearly fell out off bed in my hurry to get to the door. I'll just go to Sarah, I thought. She'll understand. Even though a small part of me thought, wouldn't you rather go to Alexander instead? I nearly screamed at the shadow in the hall, but it was only Bob. I didn't mean to scare you, he mumbled apologetically, his blue eyes gleaming silver in the sparse light. It reminded me of the eyes of a cat. My heart was hammering in my chest, and it seemed he was looking straight at it instead of my face. That's the room you are looking for, Bob said, one long arm stretching out gracefully to point at a door a little ways down. Thank you, I mumbled, already rushing towards it. His strange behavior was only spurring my panic on. I didn't really have a clear idea of what to do when I reached Sarah, but I was sure she would calm me down. I stumbled through the door ungracefully, closing it behind me with a click that sounded louder in the silence next to my heavy breathing. This room was even darker then. The guest room, but I could faintly make out the bed. I hurried towards it. I was lucky there was nothing in my path. Are you awake? I asked softly, trying desperately to calm my breathing and heartbeat. Sarah didn't need to know how shaken I was. Of course, agramokroi, what's wrong? The suave voice that spoke from the dark was distinctly male, and I knew from the furious blush and the tingling spreading over my body that it was Alexander. Oh, Bob sent me to the wrong room. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth, making it hard for me to speak. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the house. It had me nearly jumping out of my skin. Nightmare, I squeaked, the shock helping me speak. I was chanting in my head, please don't send me away. I don't want to be alone. Please. A warm hand gently grabbed mine and pulled me closer to the bed. Rustling told me he'd pulled back the blanket. Come here, then. He quickly pulled me into the bed with him, although memories of my ordeal and the dream had me rushing into his arms as soon as the words left his mouth, my haste causing me to fall down rather than lay down. The blanket was deliciously warm, and so was his body as I buried my face in his chest. He wrapped his arms around me tightly so that there was hardly any space between us. Even through my panic, I could feel he wasn't wearing a shirt. Don't worry, I'll protect you. I'd never send you away, he whispered softly in my ear, his warm breath blowing across my face. Go to sleep, agramokroi. I resisted the silly urge to run my hands over his skin to check if he wasn't hurt. It was just a dream. There was no such thing as Fort changing into a wolf and killing Alexander. A feather-light touch on my mind, just the strong sense of love this time, steadied my heartbeat. Alexander softly started humming, a lullaby, the melody familiar, although I recognized no words. The steady movement of his chest going up and down as he breathed right underneath my head was very comforting. The panic of mere moments before seemed but a faint memory, and soon I was asleep again. When I woke up, I felt like I was floating. I was warm and incredibly comfortable. I felt more refreshed than I had in a very long time. I felt whole and new. As I opened my eyes, I realized I was lying on top of someone, more specifically, Alexander. I was immediately blushing and wanted to get up before he woke or before Sarah found out. I didn't want her to think I'd just gone and slept with her brother, although technically I had. I was lying flush, right on top of him, both his arms wrapped around my waist, my face in the crook of his neck and our legs entangled. I felt a little fuzzy on the whole falling asleep thing. I knew I'd had a nightmare, although I couldn't remember what it was about. The panic it had caused me gave me the shivers even now, though. Okay, how to get him to let go? I carefully touched his arm to see if I could push it off me. It was hard not to sigh and wonder at the hard muscle in his bare chest. His grip didn't seem that tight, so I started pushing softly, shivering at the loss of warmth when his arm fell to the side. I was so comfortable I would have much rather stayed put. but he was my teacher and the older brother of my friends. It was wrong. I had managed to free myself from his arm and was focusing on freeing my leg now. That was a little more tricky because I couldn't just push him away and I couldn't put too much weight on his chest. That would surely wake him. "What are you doing?" His husky voice made me freeze in my movements. So much for not waking him up. Blushing crimson, I darted my eyes towards his face. He looked like a god with his hands folded beneath his head, his dark hair all messy from sleeping, his eyes hooded as he smirked at me, revealing a set of straight white teeth. Getting up?" I said softly. My voice sounded normal for once. "Why?" he said, a frown creasing his forehead shortly. He moved his arms again, wrapping them around my waist as if to physically keep me from getting up. I shook my head, trying to break eye contact, but his stormy eyes seemed to draw me in. Up close, I could see the darker flecks like gold floating in them, mixed in with lighter shades of gray and soft streaks of violet. "Because it's time to get up," I muttered. "It's 7 a.m. on a Saturday, Gramokoi," he said, raising one eyebrow questioningly. His accent was thickly Irish now, almost as if he wasn't bothering to talk properly. The accent was so thick that I couldn't even make out the last words, although that almost sounded more like a foreign language. I quickly looked to the beside table where an old-fashioned analog alarm stood. Shit, he wasn't kidding. It really was 7 a.m. Oh, I thought it was later. Surely Sarah wouldn't be up until at least 10. I could stay a little longer. "Good," Alexander said, as if I'd spoken the last words out loud. He was tightening his arms around me, his head dipping forward into my hair where he breathed in deeply. Then he relaxed backwards into the pillows again. Thick waves of contentment and happiness rolling off him. Was he really so happy to hold me like this? To wake up with me? We lay quietly for a while, but I wasn't tired anymore. Alexander's breathing was very deep and even, but every time I moved, he'd shift his arms to make sure I was comfortable. Every now and then, he'd be softly stroking my back or play with a strand of hair. "Alexander." "Oh!" While we were like this, he probably wouldn't mind answering a few questions for me. I was dying to find out what was up with his accents. I couldn't believe he really had two. "Yes, agihamakoy," he replied. I could hear it clearly now. The last words were definitely a different language. "Where are you really from?" I asked, daring to look up to his face again. I wanted to see to make sure I didn't miss anything. I wanted to know if he was honest with me. It seemed like the Irish accent was something he hid. His face was very open, though. He looked pleased, in fact. "Ireland, we all are," he replied, smiling fondly as if remembering pleasant things. "Then why do you talk with a British accent at school? And if Bob and Sarah are Irish too, then why do they talk American?" The questions tumbled from my lips now that my curiosity was getting the chance. He chuckled, his chest vibrating like last night, but I was so focused on his face that the wave of pleasure that ran through me went unnoticed enough. I wriggled around a bit though, my skin feeling as if I'd just been tickled. I really don't like the sound of American. Don't ask me why. "I don't really know," he smirked, all traces of accent suddenly gone. His voice sounded strange, now that he talked properly, American all of a sudden. "See, I have a knack for languages and accents, but the Irish is harder to understand for most people." He interrupted himself to laugh. "If I talk Irish too much, it's hard not to slip into Gaelic for me. I lived a long time in London. British is almost natural to me as well. Bob and Sarah. They want to fit in a little more at school. That's why you can't hear their accent. Maybe they think people won't notice we're related either that way." He laughed again as he finished explaining. It was very clear that he was in a good mood now. I smiled at him. "Oh, so that lullaby and those words you keep saying, they're Gaelic? What do they mean?" He nodded slowly, smiling warmly at me. "It sent butterflies flapping around in my stomach." Yes, the lullaby was something my mother used to sing to me when I was little. It's too long to translate, but it's about the moon and a human falling in love with a Baoban Sith. I wondered what that was. Baoban Sith, he pronounced it like Baven She, and that reminded me of the name Banshee. My mother had told me a story about that creature, a spirit woman, luring men and killing them. I wondered if they were the same. "And the words you said?" "Tea." Alexander cast me a lazy smile. Gramokroye." "Yes, those. You said them last night a few times and twice this morning," I said, nodding. The way he said them made me think they meant something sweet, an endearment. "Someday I will tell you," with a laugh he added, Gramokroye, Brittany." I frowned. "But I want to know now." Who knew if I'd ever be in the position again to ask? We might not even talk again after this. It would be better if we didn't. He could lose his job after all, if the school found out he'd slept with me. That sounded wrong in my head. It made me blush. Alexander chuckled. I promise I will tell you one day. This time, I couldn't prevent the sigh escaping my lips at the vibration of his chest. My eyes closing as I shivered, unwanted thoughts of running my hands across his skin and kissing his amazingly soft lips again shooting through my mind. It didn't help that he suddenly ran his hands over my shoulders down to my waist, his fingertips skimming across the exposed skin at the bottom, where my shirt had ridden up just a little. Any more questions? He asked softly. Aren't you afraid you'll lose your job? I asked, equally as soft. It really worried me. He had his 2 siblings to take care of. I didn't want to cause problems. Wait, what was I thinking? We wouldn't start a relationship anyway. He was just being nice because of last night. Why would I lose my job? He wondered, one of his hands back in my hair, running soft fingers through it to disentangle the knots. It's against school policy, I mumbled, feeling my face heat up again. I meant just the fact that he was holding me in his arms right now, with me lying on top of him, in his bed. Not anything more serious, but still. I don't care about that agramo kroi. He was smiling, his eyes twinkling in amusement. He knew exactly what I was thinking. But, I spluttered, don't you need the money? Run one, I work at the school because I like to teach, not because I need to. He tucked the strand of hair he'd been playing with behind my ear. Oh, that was a new word. I own several restaurants and shops. I own several successful companies. If I didn't want to, I wouldn't have to work a single day in my life. There's no reason to worry about that job. You're more important than that. The last, he added completely serious, his hand tilting my chin upward so he could look me in the eye. Flustered, I said, will you at least tell me what a ruin means? I knew I screwed up on the pronunciation. He laughed. A run, it means something like my dear. There was a soft knock at the door, and then Sarah's muted voice said, Are you too decent? Blushing scarlet, I sat up straight. Oh, she already knew I was here, and she thought we were doing something. Of course, der Führer Og, come in, Alexander said, his hands grabbing my hips to hold me still. I was straddling him now, the blanket falling down around me to reveal that I was still fully dressed and that he only wore sweats, riding low on his hips. His chest was a vision in the early morning light, although looking at the alarm told me it was now nearly 10 a.m. Chiseled planes and shades that defined the muscles even more made it hard to peel my eyes away from him, and I knotted my hands into fists on my knees to keep them still. Morning, Sarah chirped happily as she stepped into the room. She was already dressed in a flowing white and blue summer dress, looking every bit like a supermodel. She held a phone in her hand that she stuck out to Alexander. Master Barati on the phone for you. Alexander took the phone with his left hand, his right still holding my hip. It felt a little as if he was making sure I wouldn't get up. Within seconds, he was talking low and quickly into the mouthpiece. What he spoke sounded very much like Italian. God, how many languages and accents did this man speak? Sarah's voice pulled me away from staring at him. I'm sorry. I should have gone looking for you sooner last night. Her blue-eyed gaze showed nothing but sincerity. I squirmed a little uneasily. It's all right. It wasn't your fault. Besides, you shouldn't have to babysit me. I repeated the words from last night, but I didn't feel the urge to add that we were both the same age this time. I know, but still. I should have. I don't know. Done something right? Sarah exclaimed. It was obvious she was feeling very guilty about it for some reason. Sarah, I told her, trying to keep my voice as light as possible. It was hard because of the awkward position I was in, on top of her brother who wouldn't let me go. I really don't blame you. I know you would have helped me if you could have. Besides, it was very satisfying to kick him and get away myself. I hope he had trouble walking straight after that. Sarah smiled and then giggled. Oh yeah, he was limping badly when he came down the stairs. Think your sister went to take care of him though, stepsister. I corrected her, squirming again when Alexander's thumb started rubbing circles through my t-shirt. Yeah, stepsister, you two are nothing alike. Don't worry, everyone knows that, Sarah agreed. She winked and then nodded towards Alexander. He was still on the phone and seemed oblivious to our conversation. Tell him breakfast is in 10, okay? With those words, she spun around and darted back out the door closing softly behind her without making as much as a sound. Great, she didn't seem surprised at all to see me there. It almost seemed as if she was expecting it, or as if she was used to this kind of thing. I cast one look at Alexander to see that he was still on the phone, not looking at me but at something on the ceiling. Now, to get up quickly, I shifted a little to the side, but his hand kept me from moving more than an inch. The other direction yielded the same result, and pushing up with my knees didn't help at all. I didn't even see the muscles in his arms tense as I moved, even though he must have been using quite a lot of strength. Despite that, his grip on my hip felt soft and didn't hurt. In fact, it was nice how warm his hand was and that thumb was still rubbing circles. It sent tingles through my body that I didn't really want to be feeling right now. I tried grabbing his hand and moving it away, but even pulling at his little finger didn't yield any results. Was I that weak, or was he just unbelievably strong? I could see he was muscular, but he couldn't be that strong now, could he? A little fed up, I contemplated hitting him, wriggling around impatiently. "What are you doing?" Alexander suddenly asked, the Irish accent sounding heavy again. He was still holding the phone in one hand, but it appeared he was done. His eyes were a smoldering black again. "Trying to get up?" I exclaimed, showing him how frustrated I was by now. Why didn't he just let me go? To add power to my words, I took my fist and went to punch his stomach. I seriously doubted it would hurt him, but it could at least help vent some of my frustration. Before I could hit him, though, he caught my fist in his hand, the phone suddenly precariously balancing on the nightstand. Shocked by how fast he'd moved, I stared at his face. "What, eh? Wah. Don't do that, you could hurt yourself a Gromokroy," he said rather huskily. Sitting up so I was balanced on his lap, still straddling him, but his chest was pressing against me. Feeling angry for some reason, I huffed, "Can you at least let me up?" "Breakfast is ready." I knew I sounded annoyed, but I didn't care. "What's wrong? Did Sarah say something or run?" He wondered, his expression confused and a little worried, although his eyes were still dark. Both hands were on my hips now, still preventing me from getting up. Why was Sarah not surprised I was here? Is she used to finding her friends or other students in your bed or something? I clasped both my hands over my own mouth in shock at the words that had just tumbled out. Where the hell did that come from? Alexander still looked confused, but then suddenly his expression cleared to make place for amusement. "Agramokroi, are you jealous?" This time he didn't stop me from hitting his chest. I winced slightly at the hard impact. Even from this close, it felt like hitting stone. "Of course not. I assure you, there's never been a student in my bed before." "You are the only one." He was still smiling as he said it, but something in his eyes told me he was deadly serious. Especially his last words, they seemed to mean so much more. Then why wasn't Sarah surprised? I muttered, still determined to get all my questions answered. I was still blushing, and I felt almost embarrassed about what I was asking now. After all, this didn't mean anything. He was just being nice because of Fort. "Sarah doesn't get surprised easily. She always seems to know everything," Alexander said, shuddering at the thought as if he was a little creeped out about that. "Seriously, that girl has ears and eyes everywhere." I nodded slowly. I had noticed all those looks and knowing smiles she'd been giving me and Alexander too, come to think of it. Wait, what did that mean? Did she think we had feelings for each other or something? "We need to get up. Breakfast is nearly ready," I told him. He nodded. "Did I answer all your questions? A gramo quoi?" But his hands had finally let go off my hips so I could get up. I frowned at him as I hurriedly got up, nearly tumbling to the floor in my haste. Not really. I felt cold now that I wasn't touching him anymore and a little less whole, but that didn't make any sense. "I'm going to get dressed. Bye." With that, I was darting out the door, his laughter chasing me all the way to my room. What he was finding amusing, I didn't know. Probably my hasty and ungraceful exit. Great, I just made a fool out of myself. After I got dressed and made my way to the kitchen, I could already hear voices drifting up. Was that Bob talking? Since when did he talk so much? When I reached the kitchen, they were all sitting there already, all off them looking like the picture of perfection. Bob's mohawk for once, not messy, but straight, and of course Alexander wearing loose jeans and a tight black tee. I sat down hesitantly. All three of them were looking at me. Sarah with an incredibly happy expression on her face, while Bob looked more serious. But a smile was tugging at his eyes. He had a tinge of concern mixed in there, though. Alexander looked the picture of satisfaction. He seemed to practically glow, and his eyes, when they met mine, seemed to hold a spark. "Morning, Bob," I said, trying to ignore how uncomfortable I felt. Disguising my unease by starting to eat, it seemed they were all already done. Was I that late? They picked up their conversation easily. It was about something they'd done last weekend. A hunt they'd all enjoyed quite a lot. I wondered about the fact that they went hunting. I didn't think Sarah was the type for that at all. Hunting boys, now that I would understand coming from her. The doorbell rang, and Sarah was already halfway out the door. That's probably your chauffeur, Brittany. My chauffeur? I hadn't arranged for anyone to pick me up? So what was Danis doing here? I was hurrying after her, my breakfast forgotten. Danis? I didn't ask you to get me. How did you know I was here? I called out, but I stopped in my tracks when I reached the front door, shocked by the sight before me. Sarah was pressed against the door jamb, her arms wrapped tightly around Danis's neck, one hand in his blonde curls. Her legs she'd wrapped around his waist, pulling him even closer, and I didn't want to know where the hell his hands were. Most importantly, they were kissing like their lives depended on it. My mouth hanging open, I just stared. What had gotten into them? This was just the weirdest thing ever. Sarah hadn't tried anything with a guy last night as far as I'd seen, but now she was making out with Danis, whom she hadn't met until just now? Come, I'll drive you home. They'll be busy for quite some time, Alexander said, appearing by my side and pulling me with him out the door. He picked up his keys from that silver dish along the way. One last look as the door closed behind us told me they were, still kissing, making their way up the stairs now. I cringed. I didn't want to see that. We didn't talk in the car as he drove me home, and the silence was comfortable despite of this morning and last night. I guessed our shared shock of seeing Sarah and Danis like that had something to do with it. After a while, I ventured to ask, "What was that?" Alexander didn't immediately answer, but said then, "A reunion." It sounded like he had to think about what he said. There hung more to that single word then, just a simple reunion. I didn't think they'd met before anyway. I had talked to Sarah about Danis, and she had shown no sign of recognition after all. When the big, cold house that I was supposed to call home came into view, I couldn't suppress the sigh from escaping my lips. He pulled up into the driveway effortlessly and left the engine idling. "Hand me your phone," he said, preventing me from getting out of the car. Shocked, I stared at him for a moment. My phone? What did he want with that? I pulled it out of my pocket and handed it to him, though, when he held out his hand and looked at me. It was a look that said, "You better obey me." I'd only seen him look at a few people like that before, kids in class that were disrupting the lesson. I dropped my old crappy phone in his hand and shrugged. Why? He was already typing something into my phone. "I'm giving you my number." He glanced at me as he handed me the phone back, his face completely serious and tinged with worry. "Do not hesitate to call me, okay? If there's something wrong, anything at all. Or if you just want to hear a friendly voice," as he spoke. A soft caress touched my mind, easing some of my anxiety and worry. It didn't take away the sense of foreboding, though. Danis being sent to pick me up? Did that mean my father was home? Okay, I blushed again. I wanted to stay in his car and go back home with him. I didn't want to go back to this house ever again. Nothing but unhappy memories so far, and being with this family was anything but nice, ever. I felt a little like Cinderella sometimes. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door to get out. A hand on my arm stopped me. "I mean it, Britt. Call me if there's something going on. If you want to get away, I'll come to pick you up again." His eyes were large and stormy as always, but now also filled to overflowing with concern. I nodded and forced a smile, to show him I was fine. He didn't seem to buy it. "One last thing, Britt. Will you tell me his name?" His voice sounded remote and controlled again, steel covered with silk. I shivered. I knew exactly who he meant. "Fort, that's all I know." Alexander nodded and let go of my arm at last. I hurried out of the car into the front door. Rubbing my arm where he'd touched me, the skin was tingling. I waited at the front door to watch him drive away, waving half-heartedly. When the flashy red car was gone, I turned and knocked on the door. I didn't have my keys on me. They were still in my bag in the guest room in Alexander's house. With Sarah and Danis's shocking surprise, I'd completely forgotten about my bag. I took a very deep breath and squared my shoulders as I stepped into the house. The maid who'd opened the door smiled sympathetically at me and pointed towards the living. "Your father is in there." I knew he was home. As I stepped into the living room, my father didn't waste time and started yelling at me right away. Occasionally helped by my stepmother, with Jennifer piling on lies about my bad behavior. There was just one thing keeping me standing all that time: Andy. His nanny was nowhere to be seen, but Stephanie held his hand in a bruisingly tight grip. If he tried to get away, either my dad or she would snap at him that he should stand still, that he had to know what his big sister was doing wrong. It made my blood boil. The poor kid was crying relentlessly. He knew it was all lies, but it hurt him to know they were hurting me. It was very hard to drive away. I knew she was hurting, although I didn't know why. The urge was very strong to barge into that house and kill everything and anyone that was causing it. I knew that she wouldn't appreciate it if I did. She was a gentle soul. I knew she wouldn't be happy if I went and killed that fort either, but I wasn't going to let him get away with assaulting my mate. Grabbing my phone, I snapped it open, dialing a number from my contact list. I didn't bother restraining the growl that ripped from my throat as the phone was picked up. Thomas, I demand repayment. Your son assaulted my mate. The words were pulled together in a long snarl and my mouth twisted around the word son. I didn't hold my fangs back as they pushed through my gums, fueled by my anger. The man on the other side of the line growled as well before saying, "Change your tone, vampire." As the alpha of the pack of werewolves in town, he was one of the few that wasn't scared of me. In a fight I would still win easily, but his rank allowed him more privileges. I'll be damned if I will. Your son tried to rape my mate last night. I have a right to rip his fucking head off. Be happy that I haven't done so yet and went to you instead. To anyone human, my words would have been unrecognizable, but Thomas had no trouble understanding. "Since when do you have a mate? Nobody knows about that," Thomas said, his voice calm now. Although I could tell he was offended by my way of talking, he was letting his alpha side show, trying to redirect conflict. "I found her this week. Thomas, she doesn't even know yet, but that doesn't change anything." "He still tried to rape her last night," I explained, my initial anger having burned away now. I pinched the bridge of my nose. "That means Fort didn't know she was yours, though." "You can't expect him to stay away if she's not marked," Thomas said, defending his son and future alpha. It was his very own pride I was laying accusations to as well. "Thomas?" I growled his name again. "That doesn't take away the fact that he tried to rape someone, whether she's my mate or not. That's against the rules. It's wrong. He needs to be punished." It was quiet for a moment before I heard Thomas sigh. "Will you allow me to punish him? Or do you demand your right of repayment?" The monster inside me wanted nothing more than to get the chance to pound Fort's face to mush, but my rational side said, "Fine, but if there's another incident, I won't be so nice. Be glad I came to you first. You know I didn't have to do that." I knew that if Fort showed up at school on Monday, all battered and bruised, Britt would know I was responsible for it. She must have seen the anger on my face when she told me the name. She probably thought I didn't know who he was, though. "Nathan, I will deal with this. No pack member of mine gets away with attempted rape. I just want to know one thing." "So, what?" The angry beast inside me roared. After this, I knew I had to go out to feed. The anger had made me hungry, and I needed to stay in control. "Are you certain it was Fort? And that he really tried to rape her? Do you have proof?" Thomas's voice was completely reasonable, and I knew he had to ask to make sure the punishment he would hand out was just. "I smelled him on her, Jer." I saw her memories. They were very clear, I said, my voice no longer distorting into growls and snarls, but tight and controlled. I was fighting a war with the hunger and the desire to protect her, and also the desire to go to her and make her mine. "Your bond is coming along fast, then." "Very well, I will make sure Fort knows his place in the future." "Do you wish to be there when I punish him?" Thomas sounded resigned now. I had known when I called him that I would get my way. "No, I will leave it to you. If I catch him again, though, I won't be so lenient." With that, I snapped the phone shut. As I got out of my car and hurried back into my house, I sighed regretfully. I was going to miss her, and I knew I wouldn't be seeing her again until Monday in school. It didn't help that Sarah had just found her own mate, a witch, one that knew about the bond and recognized it just as she had. It wasn't fair that they got to be with each other right away, and that I had to tread so carefully to make sure I didn't scare her. I so badly wanted to just hold her and smother her in kisses and take away all her pain. Thinking of her made me aware of her mind, so far away from me now that it felt like an elastic band pulled way too tightly. She was hurting, and she was mad, too. The anger was making her blood boil hot. It made me sad that all of her feelings were tinged with resignation. It felt as though she was giving up the fight, just waiting for the storm to pass. Inside the house, I could still smell her scent. It lingered on the chair she'd sat in and hung in the corridor upstairs. My acute vampire hearing easily picked up the sounds of sex coming from Sarah's room. I groaned at the unfairness of it all as I slumped down on the couch. "Don't worry, Alex, you've come a long way to earning her trust this weekend. Besides, at least you have a mate," Bob said as he sat down in a chair opposite me. I gave him a sympathetic look and nodded. "I suppose you're right. It's just getting harder each time to restrain myself. And fighting to keep my fangs retracted all the time around her. Amongst other things," I added the last softly, knowing he'd hear. Bob laughed. "Just a week or maybe 2 more? She already loves you." I nodded. "Yeah, I know. I don't want to overwhelm her. I just want to—" I broke off, feeling embarrassed suddenly. I was starting to sound like this really stupid, love-struck idiot. Bob cast me a knowing look and then got up. Go out and feed, okay? It'll make you feel better, and it'll help you control yourself if you're full. I'll join you if you want, but I'm guessing you prefer to be alone. You're not much fun to be around anyway. You're all lovey-dovey. I shook my head at my brother, again realizing how much older he really was. I was the undecided leader of our group. I was simply stronger, faster, and had more vampiric talents than either of my siblings. But Bob was 3 years older, and the way he looked at me now told me he hadn't forgotten how it was to be the older brother. The only talent Bob really possessed was sensing moods. He couldn't influence them whatsoever, but he often knew exactly how people felt. Sarah was strongly telepathic. It was something she often combined with Bob whenever they wanted to avoid something I'd told them to do. I hurried up the stairs, reaching my own bedroom in a flash. There, I realized my bed still smelled very strongly after her. The scent so delicious that I just had to lie down and smell my pillow, breathing in deeply. After a while, too shortly, I became aware of the sounds emitting from Sarah's bedroom. I couldn't stand hearing that for very long, so with a reluctant sigh, I got changed and then hurried out the door. Time to hunt then. Although I was sure nothing would really appeal to me now. Not when I hadn't yet marked Britt and made her well and truly mine. She was crying now, so I was guessing she was alone in her room. Every fiber in my being was yelling at me to go to her and make her feel better. Yet, I couldn't just go there and climb in through her window. In the 1942, I loved that I would got just 11 CO working to they were nite. 11 CO wears 11 T. Did I really have ugly, dull eyes and plain features? I knew my hair was always tangled because of the slight curls. I suppose Stephanie and Jennifer were right. I really wasn't very pretty. I had never considered myself to be beautiful, but I never thought I was ugly either. Now, I shook my head at my silliness. Just because Jennifer had been pointing out all my flaws yesterday for hours on end didn't mean it was true. Still, I opted for wearing loose, more concealing jeans and a hoodie to go over my sleeveless shirt. I covered my figure, and it was after all getting colder outside now that summer was over. There was no sense in dressing prettily. My families would only take it as more incentive to call me a whore. When I got downstairs, I spotted my baby brother in the kitchen. Just as he saw me too, apparently because he jumped from his chair, nearly knocking it over, and rushed towards me to hug my legs as tightly as he could. His face was a little pale and drawn, and there was a red blotch on his left cheek. I felt angry all over again and picked his little frame up from the floor, hugging him tightly. No matter that he was getting a little too heavy for it. "Giant, are you okay?" I asked him softly, stroking my hands over his pretty auburn curls. After I'd gotten home on Saturday and my father had been done yelling and lecturing me, I'd been sent to my room and locked in there. I hadn't seen Andy since, but I knew he'd been trying to get to me. Even daring throwing a tantrum at Stephanie when my dad wasn't around. It's when he'd earned the red blotch, I guessed. Stephanie must have hit him. "I miss Mommy and home," he whispered, and I could feel him starting to cry again. His sobs muffled against my shoulder. Behind him at the kitchen counter stood his nanny, and for once she didn't look stern, her face softened by a look of compassion. I shot her a grateful smile as I softly rocked my baby brother to and fro. "It's okay, Giant. I miss her too. But you remember our dreams, right, honey? About getting our own place? Eating ice cream all the time?" I told him gently. Usually that would cheer him up, and then we'd spend hours fantasizing about all the things we'd do and have. Today, my baby brother just kept on crying, shaking his head and balling his little fists. "Those are just silly dreams, Brittany Lee," Stephanie says. "You can't take me away when you leave." She says it's against the law. The tone of his voice, so solemn, told me he believed that now, and that I should too. No, Andy. Don't listen to her. I will find a way. I promise. I'm not going to abandon you. Got it? "Oh, boo-hoo, how touching." Jennifer snapped from behind me all of a sudden. I stiffened and clutched Andy a little more tightly to me. Then I sat him down in his chair again. When I turned around to cast a look at Jennifer, she quickly looked away. Was that sympathy I saw in her eyes for a moment? I wasn't sure. "Be strong for me, okay, Giant?" I whispered as I ruffled his hair. He nodded, and, albeit still sniffling a little, he squared his little shoulders and smiled at me. The sad look didn't leave his pretty golden eyes, though. "Let's go, slut." "Come on, I don't want to be late." Jennifer sashayed out of the kitchen towards the garage. I must have been mistaken about that look. She was once again dressed in a short, revealing dress. Black this time. Her hair and makeup done like a model. I kissed Andy on top of his head and followed her. For some reason, Dennis had just quit his job, right when my father wanted to fire him instead for not being there when he called him on Sunday. But with Dennis gone, it meant I had to ride with Jennifer to school. That was something she definitely didn't like. When we were nearly there, she suddenly stopped and said, "Get out! You're walking the last bit." I didn't hesitate getting out, even though I knew it meant I'd be late. If I didn't, she'd tell her mother another lie about something I'd done. I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't let them yell like that at me anymore in front of Andy. It was killing him. When I reached school, I wasn't as late as I thought I'd be. Anger at my so-called family for hurting little Hay had given my feet speed, it seemed. Jennifer, of course, was right at the center of attention, with everyone staring at her expensive car. I slipped inside unnoticed when I saw neither Bob or Sarah were there yet. In fact, Sarah didn't show up for her entire first period, but I was glad to see that Bob was there in second period. He cast me a gentle smile and patted my hand as if to tell me everything was okay. When I asked him where Sarah was, he said, "Still at home. Probably doing something dirty with Dennis." What? She's skipping to be with Dennis? Does Alexander know? I whispered loudly. Luckily, the teacher didn't seem to hear. Bob nodded. "Of course," he told the principal she's sick. Why the hell does he help her skip school so she can be with her? Boyfriend? Weren't brothers usually all protective about that sort of thing? Surely he knew she'd be having sex or something. Wouldn't he want to prevent that? Bob smiled a closed-mouthed smile. Trust me, he couldn't keep them apart even if he wanted to. We're just hoping that they get all of this. Lust out of their systems during the day so that we can at least sleep at night without having to hear them. I felt myself flushing scarlet. Wow, was it that bad? I thought Sarah had more sense in her than that. From Dennis, at least I could understand. He was a guy after all. Although he had been nice enough to send me a text on Sunday, apologizing about not picking me up, explaining that he'd quit his job and that obviously he didn't want to go on a date anymore, but that he'd still make it up to me for saving him from my sister. When class was over, Bob pulled me aside in the corridor. "Bob, I'm going to be late if you don't let me go." I told him seriously, but still, I didn't walk away as he looked around, obviously waiting for the hall to empty somewhat. "Listen, Brittany, I really like you, and so does Sarah," Bob started. "In fact, I think we'd become good friends in such a short time, and I'm glad." I frowned. "Okay, what was this all about?" "Now, my brother, he really likes you, okay? Give him a chance. He's a good guy, and he deserves a girl like you." Bob said those words in such serious tones that I could only stare and gape at him. Did Bob just seriously tell me to go out with his brother? Who was, in fact, at least 5 years older than me and also my teacher, and therefore it was totally against the rules. It wasn't illegal, we were both legal adults, but it was still against school policy and he could lose his job. Bob was already gone, off to his next class when I finally started moving. I kept thinking, to hell with the rules, Alexander had said himself that he didn't care about the job. My feet had led me to the right classroom all by themselves, and I was already knocking on the door before I realized I was late. Again. He wasn't going to give me. Yet another detention, was he? But as I opened the door, Alexander glanced at me from the corner of his eyes and then said, "Detention after school. Ms. Baker, take a seat." Flushing crimson, both from embarrassment because everyone was staring at me, and from anger because it was unfair that he kept giving me detentions for things that weren't my fault. I sat down in the back next to the empty seat where Sarah usually sat. During the entire class, Alexander didn't look at me once, but he kept seated behind his desk the whole time, his free hand holding the desk in a tight grip. I was constantly assaulted by waves of desire, all of them focusing on Alexander and how badly I just wanted to be as near to him as possible. Touching his skin, running my fingers through his silky hair, and breathing in the scent of him. The tension between us was so thick that my skin was tingling with it and my cheeks felt constantly on fire. I couldn't understand how no one seemed to pick up on it, nor why it was so strong now when it seemed all right during the weekend. I was concentrating so hard on staying in my seat that I didn't realize the bell had rang, signaling the end of the period. It was very lucky that Alexander hadn't called on me during class. I wouldn't have heard him if he had. His body beside my desk all of a sudden made the tingling on my skin even worse. As I looked up at him and met his stormy gray eyes, it almost felt as if I could tell what he was feeling, happy and worried, and something else barely kept in check. I blushed when I realized I could identify that last bit as lust. At least now I knew it wasn't just me. Wait, what was I thinking? I didn't know that was what he was feeling. I was starting to imagine things. "You didn't call," was all he said, his voice gentle and solemn. I shook my head. Of course I hadn't called him. First of all, because either my stepmother, Dad, or Jennifer would have heard me talking probably, and then they'd have taken away my phone. Secondly, because he was still my teacher, despite what had happened, and I wasn't ready to share stories about my family with him. I doubted he wanted to hear anyway. Hard to know. I should go get lunch, I stammered, hating myself for being so nervous suddenly. I hadn't felt like this on Saturday around him. I had been really comfortable, in fact. He seemed to know just how to put my mind at ease. Wait, Alexander said as I got up and moved past him. Can I just hold you for a minute? I stared at him in surprise, already nodding because I wanted nothing more than to be in his arms. Still, my more rational mind spluttered, why? His arms enfolded me and he pulled me flush against his chest, his head coming to rest on top of mine. Warmth spread to my body and the tingling on my skin stopped, to make place for a slow burning that could only be described as incredibly pleasant. It felt like I could finally breathe again, and a sudden tension drained from my body, like an elastic band suddenly released from overstretching. I wrapped my own arms tightly around his waist, snuggling even closer and breathing in his amazing scent deeply. I didn't even care about the answer anymore. My rational mind had shut up and was reveling in the contact just as much. After a while, Alexander said softly, "It'll make it easier to get through the day, especially last period." I didn't know what that meant, but I knew he was right. I couldn't see the clock, but I knew he held me longer than a minute. I could care less about that. In fact, when he did let go at last, I couldn't seem to make my own arms release their grip on his waist. He chuckled softly. "Agramokroy, lunch is almost over. In not too long, this classroom will be filling up with students again." Shocked, I unburied my face from his chest to look up at his face. "No way. It's only been a few minutes." "It's been nearly 30 a run," he smiled gently, one hand coming back to rub my back softly. The other one stroked my cheek, tugging a strand of hair behind my ear. I shook my head in disbelief. "No, now!" His hands were tugging on my arms, prying them loose, and embarrassed, I stepped back. "Sorry, I didn't mean to, eh? I'll just go to my next class." I turned to hurry out the door. "No, I am sorry, Agramokroi. Because of me, you missed lunch." "I will see you last period," he said, his voice sincere, his eyes stormy and warm. I felt that soft touch on my mind again just as I smiled at him one last time as I darted out the door. Warmth and love filling my head. It was a good thing the halls were still deserted and nobody saw me leave. I felt a little sorry for Bob for letting him eat lunch all by himself, but just having spent those last 30 minutes with Alexander had made me feel really good. I could handle whatever the day decided to dish out now.